All right, so you're tackling Matthew 20:28 in your next sermon, the ransom for many verse. And you want to go beyond kind of the usual be kind message.
Yeah,
We get it. Your congregation has heard that a million times.
exactly. They're ready for, something deeper, something that really makes them, like, rethink what it really means to follow Christ.
So we did a deep dive into AI analysis of other pastors' sermons on this. And let me tell you, there are some fascinating takeaways that might just spark some fresh ideas for you.
Yeah, I mean, what really struck me was how many sermons focused on servanthood, as reflecting God's own nature, not just a list of nice things we should do.
That's interesting. So it's not just about outward actions. It's about embodying a core attribute of God himself.
Precisely, yeah, and that really kind of reframes the whole conversation. Think about it. If serving others is like a fundamental aspect of God's being, then it's not optional for us. It's not about earning brownie points or something. It's about reflecting the very essence of who God is.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So how do you translate that into a compelling message for your congregation?
Well, one sermon used a really, really thought-provoking image. They talked about depopulating hell through service.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
that's a bold statement. What exactly did they mean by that?
Basically, the idea is that by embodying servanthood, by truly reflecting God's love in our actions, we can draw people towards Him, and ultimately, kind of impact their eternal destiny.
So it's about more than just individual acts of kindness. It's about a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a powerful concept to kind of wrestle with. How would you, as a pastor, communicate that to your congregation? How would you encourage them to see their actions, both big and small, as having eternal significance?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a whole different level of motivation, isn't it? It's not just about, making the world a slightly better place. It's about participating in God's redemptive work.
Absolutely. And, that kind of leads us to another fascinating theme the AI picked up on. The idea that true happiness is found in serving, not being served.
That's definitely countercultural, both in Jesus' time and today.
Right. And it's a hard sell, right? I mean, we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to focus on ourselves, our own happiness. But what if the true path to fulfillment lies in pouring ourselves out for others?
Yeah, that's a tough message, but it's the heart of what Matthew 20:28 is all about.
Yeah.
So how did these pastors approach that tension? Did they have any specific illustrations that stood out to you?
Yes, actually. One pastor used their own experience of personal sacrifice as a parallel to Christ's sacrifice. They talked about how they, had to give up a dream job to care for a sick family member. And
Wow, that's powerful. It makes the concept of servanthood much more kind of tangible, more relatable.
right. And it kind of raises an important question for you. What personal stories, could you share that would resonate with your congregation? What experiences have you had that demonstrate the challenging but ultimately fulfilling nature of servanthood?
It's about finding those real life examples that connect the dots between the abstract concept and the lived experience. Another pastor used the story of Solomon asking for wisdom instead of riches or power.
Oh, no, that's an interesting comparison. How did they connect that back to Matthew 20:28?
Well, they argued that true wisdom lies in recognizing the value of servanthood.
Mm.
In understanding that true power comes from humility and a willingness to put others first.
Mm. That's a powerful message, especially in a world that often equates leadership with dominance and self-promotion.
It definitely challenges the conventional definition of success, doesn't it? And it forces us to reevaluate our own priorities. What do we truly value? What are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of others?
These are the questions that, really get to the heart of Matthew 20:28. But the AI analysis also highlighted another important aspect, the need to understand the historical context of this verse.
Yeah, because let's be honest, foot washing in Jesus' time wasn't exactly a groundbreaking act of service. It was a servant's job,
Yeah.
the lowest of the low.
Exactly. So when Jesus, the Son of God, kneels down and washes his disciples' feet, it's not just a nice gesture. It's a radical act of humility, a complete, upending of social norms.
So how do we convey that same sense of shock value to our modern audience? Because let's face it, washing someone's feet today doesn't quite carry the same weight.
That's the challenge, isn't it? We need to find ways to illustrate the the radical nature of Christ's servanthood in a way that resonates with our contemporary culture. One pastor used the example of like a CEO washing the floors of the company cafeteria.
Ooh, that's a great visual. It instantly communicates the idea of someone in a position of power humbling themselves to serve those they lead.
Right. And it prompts us to think about, how we can challenge our own assumptions about power and status. Are we willing to set aside our pride and do whatever it takes to serve others? It's about challenging those kind of ingrained hierarchies, isn't it? And
Right.
recognizing the inherent dignity of every person, regardless of their position.
Absolutely. And that connects back to the idea of servanthood reflecting God's nature. If we truly believe that every person is made in the image of God, then how can we possibly justify treating anyone with, disrespect or disregard?
Yeah, it forces us to reevaluate, our relationships, our interactions, even the systems and structures we have in place. Are they conducive to genuine service? Do they foster like humility and equality?
These are tough questions, but they're
Mhm.
essential if we want to move beyond the surface level of Matthew 20:28. The AI analysis also pointed to some interesting cross-references that can help us kind of delve deeper into this verse.
Yeah, one that stood out to me was Philippians 2. It's not just about imitating Christ's actions, it's about understanding that service is like woven into the very fabric of his identity. It's who he is at his core.
So how do we translate that into a message that resonates with our congregations?
Yeah.
How do we move beyond simply like telling people to be like Jesus and actually inspire them to embrace a lifestyle of servanthood?
Well, one sermon used a really interesting analogy. They talked about how, a tree doesn't have to try to bear fruit. It's simply in its nature to do so.
Hmm, I like that.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off, doesn't it? It's not about striving or earning points or something. It's about allowing our true nature to shine through.
Exactly. And that connects back to the idea of servanthood, being a reflection of God's nature. It's not something we have to like force or manufacture. It's something that flows naturally from a heart that's been transformed by God's love.
Another cross-reference the AI highlighted was Ecclesiastes 3, the passage about seasons of building and tearing down.
Hmm.
And what's fascinating here is how one pastor used this to challenge congregations to consider, the season they're in. Are they in a season of building up or tearing down? And how does that impact how they serve?
That's a great question. It kind of adds a whole new layer of complexity, doesn't it? Because it suggests that servanthood isn't a, one size fits all approach. It requires discernment and understanding of the context and a willingness to adapt our service to, the needs of the moment.
Precisely. And it also invites us to consider how our service might look different, depending on the specific needs of our community, our church, and even, the individuals we're interacting with. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about servanthood as reflecting God's nature, the countercultural call to find happiness in serving others, the importance of historical context, and some thought-provoking cross-references.
Right, and all of this has practical implications for you as you prepare your sermon on Matthew 20:20.
Yeah. You need to grab people's attention. So let's talk about those sermon illustrations. The AI found pastors using like amazing illustrations. One compared it to St. Patrick, like literally risking his life to serve.
Yeah, that's a powerful image. The idea of putting everything on the line for the sake of others. It really drives home the point that servanthood isn't just about being nice. It's about, radical commitment, even sacrifice.
Do you think every congregation would connect with that, though? What kind of like modern day saint could you use as an illustration? Someone who exemplifies that same level of selfless dedication?
That's a great question. It challenges you to think about, the specific needs and interests of your audience. Who are they inspired by? Whose stories resonate with them?
The AI also noticed that different pastors structured their sermons in really interesting ways.
Mm.
One approach that stood out was weaving together personal stories with theological insights. For instance, one pastor shared a story of sacrificing a personal dream to help someone in need, and then, bam, connected that to Christ's sacrifice on the cross.
Exactly. Yeah, it makes the abstract concept of, ransom for many so much more tangible and relatable.
Another sermon used a question and answer format, almost like an internal dialogue. The pastor would pose a question about the verse and then offer different perspectives, challenging the audience to think critically.
I love that. Yeah, it's engaging and keeps people, actively involved in the message.
Right. It avoids simply spoon-feeding answers
Yeah.
and instead encourages the congregation to wrestle with these, important ideas themselves.
But here's where it gets kind of tricky. How do you balance all this, deep theological insight and application without overwhelming your audience?
Right. You don't want to lose people in the weeds. So how do you keep it accessible and engaging?
Well, one effective technique is to break down complex concepts into bite-sized chunks using, clear and concise language. Avoid the theological jargon that can sometimes, make people feel excluded.
And don't forget the power of storytelling. A well-placed anecdote or illustration can make even the densest theological point come alive.
Absolutely. Remember, the goal isn't to, showcase your knowledge or anything, but to connect with people's hearts and minds, to inspire them to live out the message of Matthew 20:28.
So we've covered the big themes, sermon illustrations, cross-references, and even some structural approaches. But the AI analysis also pointed out something really interesting. It seems that none of the sermons directly addressed why Jesus' death is considered a ransom. You focus on the implications of that ransom, but not, the theological mechanics of it.
You're right. It's almost like they skipped over that part, assuming everyone already understands it.
Which, let's be honest, might not be the case.
Right.
It's a huge part of this verse. This begs the question, what unique theological angle could you bring to the table?
Exactly, yeah. What does ransom mean to you? How does it fit into your understanding of, God's plan?
This is where your own, theological studies and personal reflections come into play. Don't be afraid to, delve into the deeper questions, to wrestle with the mystery and complexity of, this verse. And you know what? Maybe that's the key takeaway from this whole deep dive. Matthew 20:28 isn't just a nice verse about being kind. It's a theological treasure trove, packed with layers of meaning and implications.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a call to action, an invitation to reflect on our own lives and to consider how we can embody servanthood as a reflection of, God's own nature.
It's about more than just what we do. It's about who we are at our core. And that's the beauty of this verse, right? I mean, it's so much more than just a feel-good message about helping others. It's a challenge, an invitation to really explore, the very depths of our faith and how it shakes our lives.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Every time you think you've got it figured out, there's another layer of depth and complexity to uncover.
And here's another layer for you to consider. The AI pointed out kind of a gap in most sermons. They all talked about the ransom, but they never really explained what that ransom is or why it's necessary.
Yeah, you're right. It's almost like they assume everyone already understands the theological mechanics of the atonement.
Right, which, let's be honest, can be a pretty complex topic, but it's a crucial part of this verse. If we're going to preach on Matthew 20:28, we need to have a solid grasp of what that ransom means.
So what are some ways you can approach that in a way that's both theologically sound and accessible to your congregation?
Well, one pastor used the analogy of a debt that couldn't be paid. He talked about how, we're all in debt to God because of our sin and how Jesus steps in to pay that debt on our behalf.
That's a powerful image that, I think most people can relate to. We all understand the burden of debt, the feeling of being weighed down by something we can't escape.
Exactly. And it helps us understand, the magnitude of Christ's sacrifice. He didn't just do us a favor or something, He took on the full weight of our sin and paid the ultimate price.
Another pastor used the analogy of a hostage situation.
Oh, wow.
We're held hostage by our sin and Jesus comes in as the negotiator, offering himself as the ransom to set us free.
That's a great way to bring in the element of rescue, the idea that we're powerless to save ourselves and we desperately need someone to intervene on our behalf.
And it highlights the cost of that rescue. Jesus didn't just talk his way out of the situation. He willingly laid down his life to secure our freedom.
These analogies can be really, really helpful for making complex theological concepts more understandable.
Right.
But here's a challenge for you. What unique angle can you bring to the table? What resonates with your theological understanding?
Don't be afraid to get creative.
Yeah.
Maybe you can think of a modern day example, something that speaks to the culture and experiences of your congregation.
Exactly, yeah. The AI analysis gave us some great starting points, but But ultimately, it's up to you to make this verse come alive for your audience.
And remember, it's not just about explaining like the theological nuts and bolts.
Right.
It's about connecting those concepts to people's lives, showing them how this ancient verse has the power to transform their hearts and actions today.
Yeah, because ultimately that's what servanthood is all about, right? It's about allowing God's love to flow through us in tangible, practical ways.
It's about seeing the needs of others and responding with compassion, humility, and a willingness to put their needs before our own.
And it's about recognizing that every act of service, no matter how small, has the potential to make a difference in the world.
So as you prepare to preach or teach on Matthew 20:20 all to 1, remember this. It's not just about what you say, it's about what you inspire your listeners to do and to become.
Yeah, let this verse challenge your assumptions, spark your creativity, and ignite a passion for authentic, life-changing service in your community.
And hey, while you're at it, share your most creative sermon illustration for Matthew 20:28 on our social media. We'd love to see what you come up with.
That's right.
Until next time, happy diving.